Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Skrillex. F you, Skrillex, you think you're Andy Warhol, but you're not. Exclamation points heart emoticon. So, new Skrillex album right the hell out of nowhere. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even realize this existed until almost a full week after it dropped. Which both halfway makes sense given it was a surprise release with absolutely zero promo that nobody else saw coming, but it's also kind of odd that I didn't hear about it sooner given he's literally one of the most popular and influential electronic artists of the last decade and a half. Now, I don't think I really need to recap too much of my history with Skrillex since I went over it in sufficient detail when I covered his last pair of albums in 2023, Quest for Fire and Don't Get Too Close. Link to that video is in the description. To go through that history more quickly, I've always gone to bat for his run in the first half of the 2010s, from his breakout EP, Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites, through to his debut album, Recess, as having aged remarkably well, in spite of how representative it is of that one specific era of the most commercial of commercial EDM and dubstep. Guy did completely change the game and help that specific strain of EDM reach a wider mainstream audience, and even though he obviously got a lot of hate for it back in the day, with him building off significantly more underground-leaning scenes and supposedly making it more sell-out-ish or whatever, I think the hate was always overblown since he always had the tunes and the bangers to really back himself up and prove why he was popular. Although my defense of him tends to end at that specific era from 2010 to 2014 and go absolutely no further, the KAIJU album he did with Diplo in 2015 was a big turning point for me where he started to lose me entirely, and the video I did reviewing it 3 years after the fact is one of the most negative reviews I've ever uploaded to this channel. He had some decent tracks here and there in the years following, but nothing I really cared about that deeply or could hit me on the level he did on his prime. Up until that deep house track he made with Fortet, which did catch my interest in 2021, and then finally leading up to him putting out a pretty nice comeback record in Quest for Fire 2 years ago. That album's still only on the border of being decent to good for me and nothing I felt like keeping around after posting my video. It did stick a lot to the current more chill throwback dance trends while generally leaning away from the more bombastic style that first made him popular, and his take on those more chill sounds could be on the hit and miss side. But the album had enough enjoyable moments to still work, and I suppose it was nice to see him evolve his sound for the modern era of electronic music, even delving into the original UK style of dubstep of the days before his breakout in a way that came off somewhat serviceably respectful to the roots of the scene where he came from. And Don't Get Too Close was more of like a poppy alternative R&B record that wasn't my thing, and I don't think was most other people's thing either. Now here comes this album, which he dropped with zero lead up on April Fool's Day, and when I saw it and looked into it, I had my reservations, I suppose. My expectations were not exactly riding high, because taking into account the day it released, April Fool's Day, the semi-ridiculous title and cover apparently taken from some graffiti someone put up near to where he lives. I heard that he was making tweets frustrated about his experience being signed to Atlantic Records, which I didn't actually see because I don't actually follow him on or use Twitter as much these days. I also saw that this is supposed to be his final release with Atlantic to fulfill his contract and allow him to go independent after this. And this project supposedly contains lots of unfinished scraps, some of which date back all the way to 2010, coming together in a track listing with 34 goddamn tracks, only 4 of which are longer than 2 minutes. So, all of that read to me like not the most promising sign. Like, this could be this intentionally half-assed effort that sort of brings back a little of his old punk attitude from back in the old days and acts in that grand tradition of artists giving their major label the middle finger to technically fulfill their contracts. That said, in spite of this album's intentionally messy and typically irreverent presentation, I think the results came together a lot more credibly and enjoyably than I thought they would. First and foremost, even though this album technically has 34 tracks on paper, in execution, it may as well just be considered one track. It's structured like a continuous DJ set or mixtape, and all the tracks just build directly into each other. There's lots of moments where you get one track that is just a build-up, and the next track is just the drop to pay it off, and both of them are only a minute long, if that. But you don't notice while the album is playing, since in spite of how it's structured, the pacing isn't actually any different from what you'd already expect out of his usual EDM productions. In that way, if I were to actually break this album down by every single track, that would be something of a pointless endeavor, which I'm not gonna do. Because at least a third to maybe even half the track listing is just like transitional moments that I don't even notice are playing in the moment at all, and won't have enough to them to even be worth mentioning. So sorry if you have strong feelings on like tracks like Slick Man or Animals Beat or something, I don't fucking know. Now on top of that, when you get past the structuring and look at the way this album actually sounds, I feel like this might actually be hitting a fair bit more for the people who didn't mess with his most recent comebacks or thought they strayed too far from his original appeal. Where Quest for Fire showed him going much more in the house and classic 2000s dubstep direction, this album's got a lot more of the bright flashiness and aggressive wubbing characteristic of the style that first put him on the map 15 years ago. It's not all just throwbacks to the early 2010s, a lot of it follows the more modern evolutions of the commercial-leaning bass music styles he pioneered, such as rhythm and future bass and all those. But all of it has pretty much the same appeal as the stuff that first made me a fan of his back in the old days. In fact, as a result of all that, I think there might even be a case to be made for this being his best studio album to date. Possibly. And that might not actually be saying as much as it sounds coming from me. I don't personally believe Skrillex has a truly great full-length studio album, and the only project of his I consider to be truly great is the Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites EP. But I feel like this is at least comparable in quality to Recess for me. I had quite a bit of fun with it. So I suppose, in terms of tracks, I can go through like a handful of highlights. The functional opener, Spitfire, is one of the catchier and more memorable moments on this album, and Hawaii Slim's hook is one of the easier things from this album to remember. A Spitfire! A Spitfire! I also really like the poppy melodies of Things I Promised, paying off into one of the harder hitting drops in Recovery with Space Laces. There's some enjoyably spacey vibes and trap beats on Momentum with Zakari, Stara, and I Love You Kimchi. See You Again VIP with Sweedom and Loam is a nice, quieter, emotional moment with some nice pianos. It's the kind of thing that reminds me of the small handful of moments on Don't Get Too Close that I actually enjoyed. But that also pretty explosively pays off in the more aggressive drops of MORJA KAIJU VIP. That one has 2 drops, which is nice. Although I do think the first drop is better than the second. The second one's a little stabby and annoying, though it's not the worst thing ever either. They're both good. ZEET Noise with Boys Noise and Dylan Brady makes for a fun detour into like industrial techno territory, as does its following outro booster. Ultra Intro with LH4L is one of the most consistently attention-grabbing drops on this album that brings me right back to what I loved in his earlier era, circa 2010 and 2011. And then I feel like the album's ending stretch hits you with a whole bunch of my favorite moments as well, be it the airy pop build-up and insane buzzing drop of Say Goodbye with Nyomza and Sweedom, the fittingly propulsive, almost pendulum-adjacent drum and bass of D&B Ting with Majestic, the classic dubstep wubbing of San Diego VIP, which again sounds pulled right out of the Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites era, and finally, what I think most people I've seen have generally agreed upon as being the best track on the album, the functional album closer, Voltage. Having not just more classic 2010s wubbing drops, but also a really strong soaring pop hook he sings himself, that comes together about as strongly as any of his best tracks from his prime, like First of the Year Equinox or any of those. Apparently, this track is directly from that prime era and might have shown up in like maybe an old YouTube upload in 2012 or something. So I've been told, I don't know. But boy does it make for the perfect final payoff to this entire experience, and one heck of a nostalgia bomb to send the whole thing off. I suppose there are other moments of interest that maybe didn't pull me in as much as these highlights, be it more digressions into spacey trap and hip-hop like Korabu, which features a long list of I think 6 different guests with that I don't care enough to list off. There's 2 decently hard-hitting crossovers with Virtual Riot, which are a bit on the tuneless and grating side, but are serviceable enough for what they're going for. There's a mildly nice turn for the wonky future bass side of things on a quick crossover with G. Jones. There's a bunch of tracks with kinda annoying vocal hooks, such as Gulab XX. There's a kinda fun bleepy and skittery fragment in Redline Dash that I'd keep going back and forth on whether I liked, depending on the listen. There's a pop track called G2G that stands for Glory to God, and thereby was mildly eye-roll inducing. And then there's just one track which is just like a snippet of the remix he did of Travis Scott's Sicko Mode, and that's just kinda there, so yeah. There's probably more tracks here that don't really grab my attention in context than those that do. Though I can't really get mad at that given how, again, all of it is meant to flow as one piece. At no point do I ever feel the urge to hit the skip button, not just because that would fuck up the flow of the album, but also because if any idea did annoy me, it would be over and done with and moved on to the next idea too quickly for me to even start thinking about reaching for the skip button. If there's any element to this album I might find the most annoying, it's not like any individual track or piece on here, but rather that deep movie trailer announcer voice that keeps showing up all the time. I think it's DJ Smokey, though I'm not sure, don't quote me on that. His presence was kinda funny the first time I put on the album, as he says ridiculous shit like Skrillex is dead, or we put Skrillex in the hole, or I have severe depression. And said announcer is responsible for the album's funniest moment on the track Biggie Bap, when the track stops dead and the announcer is like, "This drop has been seized by Atlantic Records and replaced by silence," followed by like 3 seconds of that stock cricket sound effect. Always enjoy me a good jab at major label bullshit every now and then. That got a good chuckle out of me. But said announcer is definitely overused on this album, and he wears out his welcome pretty fast. I know he was there to add to that whole old school mixtape feel, as on top of the fact that like every single guest feature gets a shouted producer tag, which is also like every minute of the album since there's so many guest features. But that announcer's presence in particular, it was funny at first, but it felt like a joke that got played out and ended up doing more to distract from certain moments than add to the experience for me on average. But yeah, that's about all I have to say on this album. It's not the greatest thing I've ever heard or anything. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be keeping it around longer term, but it's still a much more fun listen than I expected it to be. I do always enjoy me albums that structure themselves in tight continuous mixes like these and get all its ideas to flow so naturally together like this. And despite plenty of minor annoyances along the way and moments that just didn't grab my attention in context that prevent me from outright loving this album, I feel like they're mostly outweighed by just the fun party vibes and early 2010s dubstep nostalgia bombs that are all too easy for me to get swept up in. I wouldn't even say this is necessarily my favorite album throwing back to 2010s EDM styles to come out this year so far. I think Zircon's Arcology still holds that honor. But this album feels much more intentional about celebrating that particular era of time, from the guy who more or less pioneered that entire scene becoming a thing in the first place. And I feel like if you were a Skrillex fan back in the day who might have gotten disillusioned by middling to bad efforts he's put out over the years, I think this project could end up winning those people back. I do think it effectively recaptures exactly the kind of appeal that got him such a dedicated following in the first place. It's definitely worth giving a shot if you missed it. I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.